Great.
You're recording? Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, great. All right. So this is a February 22nd Police Accountability Board Regulations Subcommittee meeting. It's just at 7 o'clock. As a public advisory, this meeting will be conducted exclusively through video conference and teleconference. Pursuant to Government Code Section 54953E and the state declared emergency, this meeting will be conducted exclusively through teleconference and Zoom video conference. The COVID-19 state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person and presents imminent risk to the health of the attendees. Therefore, no physical meeting location will be available. To access the meeting remotely, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL posted to the agenda and to the PAB's website. If you do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, please use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. To join by phone, dial the number that's located on the agenda and on the PAB website and enter the meeting code that's also located in the same place. If you wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, please press *9 and wait to be recognized. Thank you. Shall we, when you're ready, Director Lee, shall we call to order?
You just did call the word.
Oh, I'm sorry. Should we take a roster call? I always call it the same thing. Shall we take roll call?
Yes. Calavita?
Here.
Chang?
Here.
Leftwich?
Here.
Owens?
Here.
And Saganor?
Here.
Okay, everybody's here.
Great. Everybody took a look at the agenda. Any questions, changes to the agenda or otherwise? No, I'm neither hearing nor seeing any. Shall we just move to approve through unanimous consent? Approval of the agenda?
So moved.
So moved, great.
Second.
Seconded. Do we need to do a roll call for that? I don't
No.
think. Yeah. Okay. So approved by motion and not seeing any objections. Are there any objections to the motion? I don't see such or hear such. Agenda approved. Oh, let me get the timer up. Sorry, space out on that. See, I have a bookmark for it, I believe. Are there any members of the public?
Actually, just one member, and that is Sergeant Castle is with us. And
Okay.
also as a reminder, Lieutenant Montgomery is not able to join us tonight.
Okay, so hello, Sergeant Castle. If anytime you want to comment or let us know.
We can also, Chair, if you like, we can offer to make him a panelist.
Good idea, Investigator Norris. Would you like to be a panelist? You could state so in the chat.
Or he raises, no, I don't think
Or
I
raise
have the chat on.
Oh, I see.
Can raise his hand if he wishes to be a panelist.
Yeah,
And if
can you
not,
raise your
we'll-
hand?
At any point during the meeting, if you'd like to be
Right,
a
at any
panelist on Sergeant Castle, just please let us know.
Yes. Okay.
And for
Thank
those
you.
of you who don't know, Sergeant Castle is Vice President of the Berkeley Police Association.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you for joining us, Sergeant Castle. And again, as Investigator Norris noted, please do at any point raise your hand. Okay. So I guess I don't need the online timer. Let's move on to old business, continuing to draft the permanent regs. So Kathy, is it challenging for you to pull up a version of it?
No, no problem.
Sorry,
I
there's so many
have it
things.
ready.
Okay, thank you.
Is that,
Yeah. I
I'll
can-
make it a little larger.
Board Member Calavita has her hand raised.
Yeah, I didn't know whether we were going to start where we left off or whether we were going to start at the beginning, but I had two very minor things on this first page of definitions. I'm sorry to do this, but it struck me, this first one, administrative closure of a complaint before a confidential hearing of alleged police misconduct. I think now with the new process, it's not only before a hearing, but it's before a full investigation. Isn't that right?
Closure of a complaint. You're talking about 1A1, administrative closure of a complaint before a confidential hearing of alleged police misconduct is held.
Doesn't it occur even before the full investigation by staff?
Sometimes, no, that's not true. It depends. Sometimes we do an investigation or we're halfway through an investigation and the complainant drops out of sight and we can't get a hold of them. So, or her, and so we would close it.
So
on
you're
that basis.
satisfied with this definition, even though we often don't have hearings anymore?
No, you raise a good point, Kitty. I guess we're not, so.
I'm wondering if closure before findings and recommendations are presented. What do you think
I
of
like that, Kathy. I think that's
Like that?
more.
And
Okay.
maybe for lack of prima facie evidence or something like that?
Do you want to add that last part, Investigator Norris? Do you think that makes sense? And
I think with Kathy, I think she got to the gist of it, because if we're getting to findings and recommendations, we're going through the normal process.
Right.
And this is when we haven't got through that process. So I think that should work.
Okay, so we're adding that prima facie language. I also want to flag that Ms. Saganor has her hand raised.
Findings and recommendations by the director, right, or by staff?
Let's see.
Findings and recommendations.
How's that?
Good.
Make an active voice.
Yeah.
Okay, and you had added something about prima facie, but then I want to make sure Ms. Saganor has an opportunity to speak. Do you want to add that prima facie language?
No,
Or is that too specific?
I don't, because I think that's discussed later on.
Okay.
Okay, let's leave it off now for now. Is that okay, Board Member Calavita?
Yes, perfect.
There is one other point, but I want to give Kit a chance to speak because she's had her hand up.
Go ahead, Ms. Saganor.
So this may be unnecessarily picky, in which case that's fine, I'll just withdraw it. But to me, before means something is going to happen afterwards. And of course, if this happens and then the staff doesn't bring the findings, is that right? Or the staff does, I mean, certainly before a hearing is held and then the hearing is not held. So is it before or without? But it's fine to keep it as it is. I think people understand it. I
get what you're saying though.
Yeah.
But it is closed before they bring findings. It'll be closed. Yeah.
It's, I'm thinking now, Kathy, that we might want to, let's see. I'm thinking in a situation where we have brought F&R to the board and the board has determined that a hearing is warranted, and then the complainant drops out of sight. So I think we have to push it down in the timeline. It's something along the lines of maybe before the F&R is presented to the chief, because at that point, we don't need the participation of the complainant any further.
I wonder if once we get to the F&R stage, it's something different. Is it a dismissal as opposed to administrative closure?
Right.
Well, I think we talked somewhere in these regulations about a non-cooperative complainant not participating in a hearing or making a central witness or evidence available. So I think we have to do it at the point where we no longer need the complainant's participation to move the complaint process forward.
I think that's right.
So it's either to the chief or at the point that the findings and recommendations are final.
Closure of complaint before.
Can we just say before closure of a complaint, before? Oh, I don't know.
Before,
Are you saying before findings and recommendations are final? Is that what you mean, Investigator Norris?
I think we should probably do it once it leaves this side of the bench, the oversight entities.
Mhm.
I think it's final once it goes to the chief. The
Well,
FNR is not final, but in terms of what we're
final
gonna
as far as we're concerned.
need-
Okay,
as far as what we're gonna need from the complainant.
okay.
we could
How
just-
about before
Yeah.
findings and recommendations are sent to the chief of police?
Yes. And we can still give it some further thought.
Or findings and recommendations are sent to the chief of police. Okay.
Yeah.
Does
Huh.
that,
That doesn't seem right.
Because at the point that it's sent to the chief, the board will have weighed in on those findings, determined whether a hearing was warranted and so on. So our part is, I believe, done.
Board Member Owens has her hand raised.
So clarify something for me. So when you get a complaint and just on the face of the complaint, you decide that we shouldn't move forward, you bring it to the board and we decide we're not going to move forward on it. Correct? Does
Yeah.
that complaint, even though we've decided not to move forward, does that complaint go to the chief, even though we know? So
No.
then I don't think we should say before it goes to the chief, because
Right.
not everything
It was
goes,
kind of Kit's point that makes it sound like it would have,
yeah, not
or it's
everything.
going
goes
to.
to the chief. So I don't think you can say before it goes, because not everything gets that far.
How
Maybe
about,
there should be some definition of dismissal?
What do you mean everything doesn't get that far? Whatever decision you make,
I'm saying that you get a complaint.
and
And
we
that
do an
complaint,
investigation,
yep, and it gets, and you guys bring it to the board and say,
Yes.
we don't think that there's anything that we should investigate in this complaint. So that complaint, I just asked the question, does that complaint go to the chief? And you said no.
yeah, but we're giving you FNR findings, recommendations, and you have a decision to make on those findings.
But sometimes you brought stuff to us, and that's what I'm asking you to clarify. You brought stuff to us and said that there is not enough in here to investigate for whatever.
We brought out administrative closures to you.
yes,
So that's why I'm saying that I don't think you should say before it goes to the chief, because not all administrative closures go to the chief. Is that correct? Because those that never get to the chief, that was my question.
But it's
It
still,
never-
but it's
it never
happening.
goes to a hearing. It makes it look like we have a hearing and everything, except we don't go to the chief. How about
I
we just
see,
say
I see.
closure of a complaint before a finding?
Closure of a
Because
complaint.
that includes when the complainant doesn't come to the hearing, it includes everything. Closure of a complaint before a finding. And then later on, we talk about when lack of evidence and that sort of thing.
And so that suggests that administrative closure can happen at any step up
At
till
any step.
before a finding. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
I don't know what
Does
a
that work?
finding means.
Okay, what about, we define admin closure as those cases where findings, recommendations are not rendered.
well,
Be a
but
little more-
sometimes they are, Byron. Sometimes they are, and then there's an administrative closure because the person doesn't come to the
That's
hearing.
true, that's true, and I just said that.
Yeah.
Kathy, Kitty, thank you, you said this was gonna be easy.
Hey,
Well,
Kitty, thanks a
How
lot.
about- Okay,
I'm sorry, I would leave this actually to staff to come up with the right
Yeah.
definition.
Do you guys
Okay.
want to do that?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
It might mean, and this is my suggestion, it might mean that from a public member's viewpoint, if I'm looking at this and we're not inside of the investigatory, staff, it's like, if you just tell me it's a closure of a complaint before a findings and recommendations sent to the police, it still doesn't mean that much to me. They might need a little bit more without making this complicated the way that investigator Norris is just describing in terms of what are the spectrum of bases, if it could be thrown
Right.
into the clause very shortly for why you would administratively close something. Administrative closure tells people that you're not investigating something on the merits. And that really needs to be very specific for why.
Well, except sometimes they do investigate and we have a hearing and the complainant doesn't show up. And
Right,
that's-
so you want to include that in that spectrum of typically
Yeah.
not investigating merits and then also not good
Yeah.
faith.
I
or
think that
someone
was a good
passes
suggestion,
away or
Kitty.
whatever.
We'll come back with something. And Cheryl,
Yeah.
you had a good point. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, let's do that.
Yeah.
Thanks,
So-
Kitty. That's a good,
Yeah,
or,
may I make one more suggestion for a definition? Number 3, allegation. When I read assertion, that sounds to me like affirmation. An affirmation is one definition of assertion. Why can't we just say a claim of specific police misconduct?
I
Because
suppose-
assertion
so-
makes it sound like it's somehow verified.
I don't think it does, but I'm fine with claim.
I'm fine
It
with
is
either.
in the dictionary, assertion includes like affirmation.
So
She's right.
it doesn't seem as objective as it needs to be.
Yeah.
What do you mean, board member?
Kitty's
Keller?
right.
I would say a claim of specific police misconduct.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Board member Leftwich, did you have were you about to say something?
No.
Okay, so a claim, I think a lot of times it's defined as a claim.
Get rid
And
of
then you have-
and.
and then you have to delete the N, Kathy, for Ann. Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
Great.
that's all my interruptions.
Okay, that's okay, good. We got that out of the way in front. Just remember, we're gonna stay to 2 hours. We're gonna finish at 9 o'clock. We want to make sure, we've gone through the first time very closely. This time around, we're gonna move through, but try to do it in consecutive order from where we last stopped. So I'm trying to remember where we were last time.
Page 7, at least that's what I wrote in my notes.
Okay.
I don't know if other people
7.
have that.
I added some language here.
So it might be shifted down from 7. Oh, you added the preponderance, okay.
I don't know if you want to talk about it now or,
Let's go over preponderance really quickly. That's important standard, but then make sure to jump right down to where we were before, which is roughly page 7 or 7.5, 7.25. So preponderance of the evidence, standard of proof in which the evidence on one side outweighs or is more than the evidence on the other side, but not necessarily in number of witnesses or quantity. It is based upon the more convincing evidence and its probable truth or accuracy and not on the amount of evidence.
I don't know. Because we're saying it's, one side outweighs it, but then we're saying it's not in the amount.
What do you guys think? So you guys know preponderance, basically anything over a 50-50. And that's what Director Lee is trying to capture there. And it's not a quantity, it's more of a totality of the circumstances. Totality of the circumstance with the review of the overall facts.
Can we simplify it by saying standard of proof in which the evidence on one side is more convincing than the evidence on the other?
I mean, what's the legal definition? This is a legal term. We should probably stick with whatever the
well,
traditional.
there are lots of, you can look up lots of different ones and I didn't make this up, so.
I believe this is from California jury instructions. And this is what we are currently providing our hearing.
I think this is a
panel
little different.
with. No?
How about on one side outweighs or is more convincing then?
That's what I just said.
Oh, sorry, I thought you said something else. But yeah, just add the word convincing.
Okay.
I was suggesting we keep what standard of proof in which the evidence on one side outweighs, comma, or is more convincing than, comma.
The evidence on the other.
But then maybe we can just,
So the California courts as a civil plain English comparison, civil
Yeah.
jury instructions, And that might be, I think that's where Director Lee and Investigator Norris are referencing this. One part of it says that the preponderance of the evidence means evidence that has more convincing force than that opposed to it. If the evidence is so evenly balanced that you are unable to say that the evidence on either side of an issue preponderates, your finding on that issue must be against the party who had the burden of proving it. So that's a little bit more formal.
Yeah,
in the
that's probably
context
more
of
than we need.
adversarial.
Yeah, I didn't, yeah, I saw that. I don't like using the word preponderates.
Yeah,
Maybe we
that's what I
don't
mean.
need the last sentence, though.
Okay,
Yeah, how about just that?
I think that's good.
okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. What do others think? Do we need, I think the reason why Director Lee threw in that last sentence was a convincing evidence aspect of the probable truth.
But we
But-
added the word convincing up
But we
above.
added up above, yeah.
Okay, so it's
So-
up there now, seems to capture it.
So I just want to quickly read from you from the California Judicial Council. And I know, Kathy, you weren't completely crazy with all of this, but preponderance of the evidence means what it says, that the evidence on one side outweighs, preponderates over, is more than the evidence on the other side, not necessarily in number of witnesses or quantity, but in its effect on those to whom it is addressed. So I don't know if we're changing the meaning of it or we're establishing our
Yeah.
own meaning.
I don't
Oh,
like
no,
that.
this is fine. We've
That's
used
not
most-
helpful either.
Okay.
We've used most of those same words in this.
Yeah,
There's a distillation of it, and it does not, there's an agreement that does not appear to change what Investigator Norris just read. So we don't want to change the standard, obviously. I think it encapsulates it.
Okay.
Great.
All right.
Okay, good. That was a good conversation. And then should we go back down to page 7? Is there anything else that you added, Director Lee?
I don't think so.
we could Look at.
I have a note here, but I think this was part of our conversation. This was from last time. Yeah, this is from last time.
Okay, so we're going to be at about 7 1/4 then, if we landed on. Do you guys remember? I honestly am having a hard time remembering now.
Well, I had a comment on page 7 before D, the section, which I guess would be
Eight?
C8. Yeah,
So on the hard
and I
copy,
see Kitty made a comment about that too.
Right.
And I guess my thought was, how about if we delete that last sentence? Because we're not a criminal jury. So we don't need to, technically, we can consider somebody pleading the fifth. Because what if the officer refuses to answer any questions at all? We're not going to take that into consideration. I think we would. And if we don't want to delete that last one, I do think it needs to also apply to the complainant. Because if in fact someone, their exercise their constitutional rights can't be held against them, well, then it's the same thing for the complainant. Like, what if the complainant, this incident happened when he or she just committed some minor crime, and we say, well, where were you before then? And they said, well, I'm asserting my rights against self-incrimination. So, I mean, it could also happen with the complainant, but my fix would be just to delete that last sentence.
allowing that scope there and not narrowing it is what, okay.
I don't.
I'm
I'm
wondering if that might be in the police officer's Bill of Rights.
I was just gonna say that.
I think it is. I'm looking it up now.
We all got a hard copy thanks to board member.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I want to ask Board Member
Director Lee.
Leftwich, how does it harm us having it there?
Well, it's only imbalanced. It only harms us, to me, if we don't extend the same right to the complainant.
And as a reminder, the disposition of the complaint has to do with whether or not the officer will suffer in any way. The complainant is never at risk of harm from filing a complaint.
No, well, but that last sentence doesn't talk about, it talks about our disposition of a complaint. So they would be harmed if we.
They're just saying that you shouldn't use any constitutional rights an officer, uses in your consideration of whether or not those allegations, those or would be sustained against him or her.
Yeah,
but-
I mean, that may be in the, I didn't think of that it may be in statute, but as a general principle, we're not a criminal court. We're not a criminal jury. So I don't think it would
I think it's
apply.
just a reminder too, because our boards change. And it's just a reminder for people to know what's proper. And
I guess
that's
my
all.
point is, I only think it's improper if it's in statute. And if that's the case, I still think we ought to, even if it isn't in statute, give the same rights to the complainant.
But this is saying that if the subject officer exercised his constitutional right, we're not going to hold it against them. And I think that it's probably in POBRA because they have a right to exercise their constitutional right. So I think that this sentence is appropriate to be there, that we're not going to hold it against them. And I also agree with Byron that the complainant, there's no disposition to the complainant because we're not looking at, this is really an administrative personnel hearing, and that's not impacting the complainant what our disposition is. So it would not fall to the complainant to, if they invoke their constitutional right, that the complainant can come in and say, I don't want to testify at all. You got my oral, that's it. And that's their right. If that's the way they want, we've been talking about the complainant can be anonymous, so they don't testify at all. So that's within their right, but the officer has a constitutional right that they can exercise, and we should not hold that against them. I think that sentence is
I
appropriate.
think everybody has that right. If it's a constitutional right, everybody has that.
Exactly,
but
and that's
if-
what I said. That's exactly what I said. If the complainant doesn't want to come in and say anything, they have a constitutional right not to.
So should we-
Right, but then that last sentence should also be extended to them. But if nobody else agrees with me, we can move on.
So Board Member Leftwich, you're saying that we should add the subject, either delete it or make it symmetrical, meaning the subject officers or the complainant's exercise of any constitutional right shall not be considered.
Right. Right.
Otherwise, delete it, which would not restrict that right. Obvious constitutional.
Right. If they've got it, they've got it. We
Board
don't.
Member Owens, what do you think about that? Also, Board Member Calavita and Ms. Saginaw have their hand raised.
let's listen to the other members of the committee.
Okay, Ms. Sag, I can't remember if Board Member Calavita or Ms. Saginaw had her name up.
I don't mean to have mine up. I'm trying to see if it's in the Bill of Rights.
Okay, are you looking at page 13 and 14, by the way? There's some stuff about the Lieberger and the right against self-incrimination. There's a Lieberger warning, which is kind of like a Miranda warning for
Liebert,
Lieberger, sorry.
not Lieberger.
Not
I'm looking
Limburger
at page
cheese.
50.
No.
Okay. I don't know if that is, I'm trying to see if that's related to this.
I'm looking at the Police Officer Bill of Rights, which starts on page 56.
Okay, I'm looking at the little book that I think you and Kathy were able to.
No,
put
I
out.
am too. It's page 56.
Oh, 56 of it. I was looking at 50, so let's double check that. In the meantime, Ms. Saginaw, do you have a
I
comment?
just want to make the point that I think it's inaccurate to say that the outcome will have no impact on the complainant. There will not be discipline, right? The officer can be disciplined. The complainant cannot be disciplined. But that's really not the same thing as saying there's no impact. Of course, that there are other kinds of impacts aside from a formal discipline and judgment. So I think we just need to think about that. And I appreciate very much Julie's pointing that out.
No, that makes sense.
So give me an example of an impact to the complainant, just out of curiosity.
If
I think Julie was talking about the complainant there might be some potential legal action implied in this situation, even if there isn't an actual case right then, in which case we would toll. But I think that if a complainant doesn't want to say anything that might incriminate them in the eyes of the police, they might want to plead the fifth.
And there's nothing to say that they even have to testify. That was my point. They don't have to testify. They can.
Well, except in the past, Cheryl, we did have a case that I was on a board of inquiry of where the complainant pled the fifth. And subsequently, we did an administrative closure on it. We didn't,
Oh, that's right.
we didn't really continue. I mean, it did close the case when the complainant when the complainant pled the fifth.
But we're
That can
also
lead
saying we're gonna allow people to complain anonymously. So in a sense, they're not saying anything, which is, it functions the same as pleading the fifth in the sense that there is no testimony. So we're not holding that against people to.
Right. So in that regard, we should be saying that we allow them to plead the fifth, right?
Sure. I mean, they don't have to testify, so they don't have to plead the fifth. They just, I don't want to testify. But the
Well,
officer doesn't
in
have.
the past, if they didn't show up, we closed the case.
Right.
Well, that's
Sounds like
that's different from showing up and refusing to testify. And I thought, Kitty, that in that case where the complainant took the fifth, you felt that you really couldn't get the information you needed to proceed
Yeah.
Without the complainant.
without testimony from the complainant.
I recall that vaguely. Yeah, I was on that VOI as well.
Yeah.
So if we were to, I just want to make sure we move this forward. It is 7:31. So we are either going to keep it, maybe with modifications for symmetry, or remove it under the understanding that both the officer and complainant, of course, have the right to exercise their constitutional rights, and that should not have a whatever prejudicial effect on the disposition of the complaint or some kind of language. We don't have to use that kind of language, but that'd be the assumption.
So clarify something for me. In the disposition of the complaint, we all know that with the officer, it's a personnel decision, right? But with the complainant, what is the disposition? What happens to the complainant with the disposition of their complaint?
Nothing formal, maybe something emotional, but nothing formal.
And I think we don't, the emotional toll can be very significant. It's, as you say, it's not formal, it's not disciplined, but there is definitely an impact, right? Emotional impacts are impacts.
So I guess what I'm saying is, if we said the complainant's exercise of their constitutional right shall not be considered by the board in its disposition of the complaint, that's what you guys are saying?
We're saying either delete it altogether, because either I just don't see the need to have this, but if we are going to have it, I think it should be symmetrical.
I think we should definitely have it for the officer, because I think, when we get a chance to look through this POVR, I bet it's in there.
I'm searching for it. I
didn't
quite
see
find
it, Kitty. I looked for it as well. And I'll just say also, Julie, you may take it for granted that you know this because you have legal background, but you have to remember, we're going to have many volunteers that serve on this board throughout the next decades. And it's just an important reminder of them how to approach their role as a hearing panel member. Because
Yes, I'm saying technically, I'm not sure that it's required, because this isn't a criminal matter and we aren't a jury or a judge.
But it is.
So, but I don't know. I haven't researched that.
But it is a personnel hearing for the officer, and the officer has rights. And so
Right.
if it's a personnel hearing, they have the right to exercise their constitutional privilege.
Yeah, I would be in favor of keeping this for the officer. The only thing I'm agnostic on, I don't know, is whether we can make it symmetrical, because I know in the past, it seemed like it was hard to proceed if.
Yeah, I understand.
Well, but you're assuming that the person is, like, as a blanket matter, asserting their right to the Fifth Amendment. But what if, in like the scenario that I raised, it was just their claim arose out of some incident and somebody said, well, where were you coming from? And it's not really, and that one answer is, well, I don't want to tell you because I had just committed a minor crime. And so I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment rights, but I'm otherwise answering all your questions and cooperating. So it isn't the extreme case that
Right.
you experience where the person wouldn't answer his or her mouth at all. So I'm just saying there could be a scenario where it could come up, and if we're going to give the officer that right, it should be the same to the complaint.
Okay. I understand where you're coming from, Board Member Owens, and I understand where Board Member Leftwich is coming from. Let's look at this from the perspective of, as Investigator Norris referred to, folks who may not be grounded in the law and might be newcomers to this and serving on the panel. If they read this, would they understand this to mean that for the officer asserting, let's say, the Fifth Amendment, it shouldn't have a, prejudicial, it shouldn't be prejudicial or impact the disciplinary aspect of this, and then still retain the ability of complainants to do the same, with obviously a different impact, which we're referencing as emotional.
Or in the case that Julie was talking about, it's not just emotional. Somebody might plead the Fifth because they don't want to implicate
Yes,
themselves
that as well, right? Which is
criminality.
that's an important
Yeah.
hypothetical as well.
Okay, but let me throw this out there. The officer has to come and testify. The complainant does not. So if they want to invoke their rights, the complainant, they don't even have to come. They can file the complaint and that's it. Or they can file the complaint and give whatever testimony. They don't have to do anything.
If they want to pursue their complaint, they need to show
They
up
have to
and
show
then.
up.
So.
We haven't made that determination.
We're going to take anonymous complaints. Who's going to show up?
Wait, we haven't made that determination that our complainants don't have to participate in this process. Now, the anonymous thing's a separate thing. I know you guys are still working out, but I could be wrong, but I didn't think we were at the place where we're telling non-anonymous complaints that they don't have to participate in this process.
I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying that I don't think at least I wouldn't hold it against the person that if they said, hey, I want to complain, but then they don't want to participate, that's their choice. That just means it limits how much of an investigation that can be done.
Well, they are participating. I mean, in my scenario, they're completely cooperating and participating. They just didn't want to answer the one question that might implicate them. But maybe we should just flag this, and maybe Kitty or Kathy, somebody could look to see. I mean, maybe it doesn't matter if it's in the police officer
No,
bill of rights or not.
the closest thing I found is on page 60 of this little booklet, section 3304.
I have
No
it in front
public
of me.
safety officer shall be subjected to punitive action or denied promotion or be threatened with any such treatment because of the lawful exercise of the rights granted under this chapter or the exercise of any rights, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what I found. In any case, I think it would be a mistake to delete this from this. My only question is whether we should say neither the complainant nor the subject officer's exercise of any constitutional rights shall be considered by the board in its disposition of a complaint. I would be willing to put that in there, but I don't know what others think. You know, it does.
I would like to second that suggestion.
Yeah.
From Board Member Calavita. It comes across as even-handedness of reminding the members of the panel that both sides need to be considered, right? You're not coming in, you're coming in without bias or prejudice. I think that's important.
Okay, but let me throw this out there and then I'm going to stop with this. But I just heard people say that if a complainant comes in and doesn't testify, you do hold it against them because you'll throw out the case. That's what you just said.
You could hold it against them, that's right.
That's what we did in the past, but
Right.
I'm proposing.
So you are saying that, that they could come in and there may not even be exercising their constitutional right. They're just deciding, I don't want to testify. And you're not going to hold it against them. but at the same time, you say you do, because if they don't testify or they don't show up or whatever, you hold it against them because you throw their complaint out. So
What if a police officer, though, what if it was the same thing? That's why I didn't like the sentence. But what if the police officer doesn't answer, comes and doesn't, and just pleads the fifth for everything?
he has to answer unless it's going to be his constitutional right.
But what if he says it is?
If he,
I plead the
he
fifth
doesn't,
for all of this.
he can plead the fifth, but my understanding is he subjects himself to losing his job.
But that's not what we're saying. This sentence says what we're gonna do with it, not what his employer's gonna do with
But
it. This
remember,
says-
we're all part of this process now. We're all linked.
But it says we will not, the board will not consider it.
In the specificity of the disposition, that's, I see where you're coming from, board member Levitt. So that,
How about
that language that you just suggested, board member Calavita? Can that be typed in here so we can see it?
I'm wondering if instead we should say that both the complainant and the subject officer retain all of their constitutional rights in the process and not hold us to it having
Right.
no bearing on the disposition.
Right. Yeah, I
Because
like that. Because
it-
it does. It will.
it-
It could
it will.
potentially.
if an officer does not answer anything, it's hard for me to imagine that would not be a component in the disposition.
But if it's his constitutional right not to say anything, then we shouldn't, he has a right to exercise that. So if it's his constitutional right, you can't hold that against him because he's invoking his right not to testify to something.
It's hard to make a decision, though, if we have a hearing and people don't answer any questions.
But if it's his constitutional right not to,
I understand
then
what you're saying. I'm just saying, how do we decide?
I understand that, but then that goes back to the department to make a determination as to whether or not he did have that constitutional right. And if he didn't, and I mean, they have representation, and if he didn't, and then it's up to the department to deal with the fact that an officer did not have a constitutional right, chose not to testify, chose not to testify. And so therefore now it's some other policy violation within the department. Because this is, I mean, it's saying in the.
By the way, this has never
that they-
happened, FYI. This has never happened.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
We're
you
spending too
always
much
have
time
to
on it.
you have to talk about hypotheticals when you're drafting stuff
I
like
know, but
this. And
we'll never
apparently
get-
it did happen with the complainant.
It happened with the complainant, but in terms of the officer, we should move on. It's never happened.
Well,
It
but
could happen, yeah.
nonetheless, you need to consider hypotheticals. Well,
So how about that language that was just proposed?
What was that?
I would say that both the subject officer and the complainant retain all their constitutional rights
period.
throughout the process.
But I also think it's important to say that the board won't consider it if they do that.
But it's not, it's just not realistic if a subject officer didn't answer a single question and it hasn't happened, but it could happen, then it's not realistic to say that we won't consider that.
I think if it's their constitutional right, you have to not consider it.
She's right. Cheryl's right.
You can't say, oh, they have a constitutional right to do something, and then they do what they constitutionally have a right to do, but then you're going to consider it against them because they.
Okay, then the complainant has the same right. I just kind of come back to what I said.
So I move that we use this sentence here and understand that when we say they have their constitutional rights, we cannot consider that in our disposition. And I would just,
I don't like leaving it in there that we understand it. I think it needs to say it.
oh, yeah,
What
right
you
here.
just added the clause?
Both the subject officer and the complainant retain all their constitutional rights throughout the process.
That's not
If they
clear. enough.
exercise it, we should not consider it against them.
So,
I think it's important to say that.
Yeah.
okay,
it
so
is.
board member Owens would like to add a clause to the end of that. Let's just take a look at how that looks there and then continue to talk about it so we can kind of see if we get a consensus. So I thought that board member Calavita, you just described the clause to add there. And then this looks fine. Any such extra shall not be considered by the board in its disposition of a complaint.
I'm just sort of guessing this is what Cheryl meant to say.
Yeah. So you're kind of adding that second clause. What does everyone think here?
That's fine with me.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
What, this section that we're in, I just want to make sure.
Because
Because
conduct of interviews, exercise of the constitutional right.
this is just, let's see.
Do we need to pop a comment there to the side, do you think, so that when it goes further, people are going to see this and be, what do you mean by this? I mean, might want to pop a little note there. Is there some kind of pithy, like 1 or 2 sentences? Or is it self-explanatory?
Probably
Um,
self-explanatory when we added complainant in there. But I don't care either way.
You know, Byron
This
makes a good
section,
question.
this section has to do with the officer, and it's just, I'm just worried about placement and making sure these regs make sense, because this whole section has to do with the officer. If you read,
Oh. Does it?
Well, let's see.
No,
Number
Does
eight.
it?
wait,
Complaint investigation.
I'm talking about 8, 2C8, conduct.
No,
of
but
the-
C is complaint,
Yeah, C
just
is
talking about number
complaint
8.
investigation overall.
I'm talking about conduct of interviews. In the printed version I have here, it's 2C8.
well, it says to all parties, produce a
Oh.
minimum of
What happened
inconvenience.
to my numbers?
Oh no,
Uh-oh.
it looks so good. What happened?
Ah,
Word drives me crazy.
Or
So,
anyway, the paragraph, the section that starts conduct of interviews, I don't think they reference the complainant in this section at all. I'm just trying to make sure we're not mixing things up here.
yeah, I think it
well, it
references
says
both.
all parties.
Yeah. Director Lee, you can copy the new red line and then go Command Z to get back to the former version, maybe 2 steps ago. That might have resulted in messing up the numbering.
Command Z? Control
Yeah.
Z?
Control Z.
No, it's, I know it says all parties, but it has to do with officers. You just
Couple of
read the
times
whole
when I
section.
return it to the pre-saved version.
Well, this first sentence, Byron, is about the interviews that you conduct, and they should, it doesn't specify that it's just about officers.
That didn't work? You didn't go back to the prior numbering? I don't know when it
No.
changed. That's kind of odd.
I think it changed when I tried to add the, let me see.
I'm okay with that language, by the way. So, C, complaint investigation, and then A was converted in, 1 was converted into A. That's what happened. Time of completion. That's right. It should be 1. And then you did have the 1A, B, and then 2 at transmittal of complaint. That's right. Okay.
I'll fix the margins later.
Yeah, notice is at 3. Yeah, all those underlines were 4, 5, 6. And this reproduction is 6. You had A, B, and then 1, 2, 3 under B. Okay, interview notices is 7 and conduct interviews is 8. Cool. Oh, continue numbering. Okay, cool. Okay. Thanks. That's kind of a
Oh, did I
There we go.
lose all my other numbers?
Oh.
too? Oh, this is crazy.
Okay, so D is pre-hearing. Okay, so I guess
Okay.
if you want to,
I-
as we go through it, we can change
No,
it, and then-
I gotta get back to a former version, so I'm gonna
okay, you
copy
want to,
this.
okay,
I'm gonna copy it and move
drop it into like
somewhere.
okay, that's cool.
Yeah, drop it into another,
Okay, document. And then how about the language we just did before with the definition? So I think you should cut and paste that too. The definition for administrative closure for 1, I think it was, and also, did we change another definition there?
We changed the assertion.
Yeah, we changed the standard.
Okay, so
for-
under 3, so 1 and 3 had, you might want to just cut and paste that, those, at least that 1 and 3,
Yeah.
and put it on
I
a
lost
separate document.
I lost all my numbers.
I'm sorry, Kathy,
Sorry about
that's
that.
It's
terrible.
not,
Well, you could work on the numbers.
it's
Yeah,
just,
just
it's
kinda paste it in.
Word.
Yeah, it's
You know,
terrible.
Sometimes.
Why did it do that?
I don't know, Word can be really annoying. So Investigator Norris, I understand you're concerned about making sure that we're putting stuff in the right section. My interpretation of the section is that it applies to both complainant and officer.
Well, you have to read before that, and it gets into, if you go go back to number 2, number 3, it's taking you through the process of notifying the officer, getting officer schedules, requesting documents, evidence from the department, sending out interview notices, and then it gets down to conduct of interviews. The flavor is there. Maybe it doesn't matter, but the flavor obviously is there for our interaction with the officer, because the complainant's interviews are normally conducted when they walk in the office. I mean, we don't have a formal process for that per se. This is, anyway, maybe
I don't
the
think that-
exercise of constitutional rights could be its own little section, maybe number 9.
I think it could, if it's its own little paragraph under 8, I still think it should be under 8, but a separate little paragraph.
And we were talking about hearings, but this is in the interview part. So it's broader. It's the hearings, it's the interviews, it's a whole process.
Yes,
That's
right.
true. That's a good point too. So, but in that case, Board Member Calavita, would it be broken up into like a 8-1?
just the way
or 9?
Kathy had it there before she lost the numbering, there was a space between the last sentence of number 8 and this little just
Paragraph.
reminder that both the officer and the complainant retain their constitutional rights. I mean, I just think it's,
Sure, it's not classified differently though, that it's still under 8.
yes.
Right. And the heading of 8 is conduct of interviews, exercise of constitutional rights. So it makes sense
Yeah.
to have it under there just as a
It
separate.
makes sense,
paragraph.
and just have a little space between,
Okay, I mean, I'm fine with that. Investigator Norris, would that be clear to you? It's like broken off to its own paragraph, even though it's still under 8?
Maybe, I just want to make sure that it seems like it should be in one place where it's clear that it applies to interviews and hearings.
Okay.
The
Or
hearings.
we repeat it in the hearing section. I know we don't want to do that, but we're talking about interviews here. It's specific.
Right. But you're also saying it also applies to the hearings. So you're wondering if it should stand on its own or also be repeated in the hearing section.
Yeah.
What if it's under 9 like that, Board Member Calavita?
that's fine. I'm having a hard time seeing. It's very
Oh, let's just
tiny.
leave it at 9. I'm good. Let's just leave it there.
Then take out exercise of constitutional rights in 8.
Yeah, you have to take that out unless it's repetitious.
Yeah, okay, so it's been moved down to its own,
Yeah.
why is it?
Oh,
Okay, now it's 8.
Oh,
So I'm not confused here.
Oh,
Is that
Lord.
okay? Oh,
all
there we
right.
go. Okay, what happened? Okay, now it's back to 9. Let's see.
Try,
I want
Okay.
to ask Cheryl, you're okay with that, right? Number 9, is that workable?
Board Member,
Cheryl?
she's nodding her head.
She's nodding.
I'm nodding my head, I'm sorry.
You're not, okay.
I'm nodding my head thinking you can hear the
No, I
marble.
saw you. I didn't know if you were sure.
I see. It
Sorry.
was not a vigorous nod. Is that what it was? Okay, now it's a more vigorous nod. Thank you.
Okay.
That was very clear. Okay, good. This is a 9. So are we on track now to keep going down here then? I think
yes.
so. Okay.
Yes, Julie's used up all of her chips.
but I've got more.
I know.
Here's a staff suggestion. Because sometimes if we're saying there's no prima facie case, I think we are saying it is a judgment on the merits.
Yes, you're right.
are you?
See,
Oh, I see.
The track
Can we
edits.
just delete that section, Kathy?
that's what I'm
That's
suggesting.
what those crossouts are, yes.
Those
Yes,
constitute
let's
general-
do it.
Okay,
Okay.
Okay, everyone's in agreement? Moving on.
Yeah, does everybody understand? I know we just jumped into it very quickly. Understand why there's a suggestion from staff to delete?
So let me ask you a question, because I want to make sure I understand.
Okay.
Mr. Position. So there have been cases where people have brought a complaint and that the complaint that they brought forth would have been administratively closed. But in the process of reviewing that case, something else came up. So there is a judgment on the merits of the original complaint because you would have closed it, but you bringing up something else that you find because of the original complaint.
yeah, but
Maybe I'm confusing
then
myself.
it's not being closed, right? If we're bringing something else?
There's no administrative closure in that case.
In your scenario, it's not being closed.
Okay, if I come up with whatever's rattling around in my head that's confusing the heck out of me, I will bring it up.
Okay,
But yeah, something's rattling in there. I don't know what it is.
okay.
Let us know if you can think of something. Cool. So now we're down at we're 8 of 22. Make sure
Yes,
we have hard copies too.
this is a very old comment from Kitty, who wanted examples here.
Oh, no, I totally retract that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Okay,
I
moving
have a-
along before she changes her mind.
No, I'm not going to change my
Hurry.
mind. I thought that was Julie's comment. I don't, yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
have
that's
a suggestion though for this section. And the point is to say that the board may view relevant body worn camera footage, because this is talking about,
Where are we?
Where are you?
well, I'm under E. Initial submission and consideration of investigative findings and recommendations, just because when you have done that, we've also watched the footage. And I just thought that should be explicit. So I was thinking we might want to add a new 2. So we're in E. 1
Yeah.
is time to submit.
Mhm.
And then I thought we might want to add a 2 with the heading body worn camera footage and say the board may view relevant body worn camera footage prior to and or during the closed session.
Would
And
that
I'm
be
not
under?
positive
Hey,
it
where
goes
and
here.
why? Where?
Kathy,
So
can you scroll
E-
down so we can see the heading?
So
What?
Yeah, thank you.
the only thing, board member, like, which I understand what you're saying, but right now the subsections are time to submit, standard of proof, categories of findings, and then recommendation of discipline and level of discipline, and then board decision. There's a kind of linear symmetry to that. Could we put it, if we
I
put it
guess
as,
the reason I thought about it was it talks about, I mean, as I said, maybe it shouldn't go here. There's a reference on page 15 also to the body worn camera footage, but it's just a heading. So I just want somewhere it to be clear that it's appropriate for us to view footage prior to and or during a closed session.
and would that fall under what category? Would that be evidence? Or
I mean,
body
this,
worn?
This is the initial findings and recommendations.
right, and said you're presenting them to
Right.
us in a closed session. And in
Right.
and sometimes we've also seen body worn camera footage.
Before a hearing, before a scheduled hearing.
No, but
No, it's been in a closed session.
during F&R also. So how about, but I don't think we've offered for you to view it before.
Well,
Yeah.
I think we have
We
asked
present.
for it though, Director Lee, that we.
Well, I don't know. Well,
Yeah.
we have to have that discussion. And we haven't offered it. We've just brought it to you like we will tomorrow. We have
Right.
findings for our 5 o'clock meeting. We're bringing findings and recommendations, and we have body worn camera video to show you.
And there's no, just want to make sure I understand, is there any restriction for us to receive such video evidence prior to a closed
Oh,
session?
and one of the things that I had submitted some language on was on that policy 425 or whatever it is to make clear, because that is the practice, and I just think it should be codified. And so on page 15, heading 7, viewing body worn camera footage, but that just talks about during the hearing, in
That's right.
advance of a hearing. And so it needed to go someplace to say that it also could happen during the presentation of investigative findings and recommendations. And so I couldn't find the right place for it. So I kind of thought we could do it here, but it isn't perfect, but it should go somewhere.
I would suggest that we maybe between 4 and 5 right here. That's why I stopped here.
4 and 5, okay. And would it be its own number, or would it be like a,
It could be its own number.
Have a heading, yeah.
so it's just a heading that just says body worn cameras?
Is that needed? Why is that needed? Does everything
Just
have
to
to
say
go?
that they may consider it. I just think it's good to be explicit about it.
Okay.
Can we put it in here? Upon reviewing the director's investigative findings and viewing relevant body worn camera footage?
Yes.
Sure, that could be fine. So
Yeah,
board
that
member
works.
Lefkovich, you're referencing that because of the sometimes the not at BPD, but in police departments in general, there's concern around the availability of body worn cameras and the accessibility of such, and you want to naturalize it by being explicit inside of the language. Is that
Yeah.
is the motive you
Right,
have?
because that is the practice. And so we're codifying, what the practice is and making sure everybody understands that this is the practice.
Okay.
I think that's good the way you've done it, Kathy. I'm wondering, it makes it sound like we have to view it. Could we say, and potentially viewing relevant body worn camera footage?
Mhm.
Because we might not always do it.
Should we say
Right.
relevant and available, just in case it's not?
Potentially doing potentially relevant and available. I
You know,
think
'cause in some
available.
cases,
Well-
in some cases, we may not have it.
Well, that's fine.
Potentially takes care of that.
Potentially takes care of it.
Investigator Norris, are you worried that saying not putting available in there would suggest that it must be available?
Yeah, but they think it's just, yeah, that's what I was worried about.
I
That's
think-
why I had may before, when I had my other language, it was a different, different structure, but I was
I
saying
think
they.
potentially covers all the bases.
I think it looks good. Are there others okay with this?
Well, I guess I don't love potentially. How about viewing any relevant? Or you think it sounds mandatory then? Is that
Yes,
the
it
concern?
sounds mandatory that you have to.
Which could then affect how long we retain body worn camera footage too.
But the board could decide it doesn't want to
But-
see. the
And
footage.
upon request, or it isn't always our request, that the director might think we should.
What's the matter with potentially? I don't understand the problem.
I don't know, it just seems kind of strange, but that's okay. I can live with it.
Right, I think it's worded choppy for one, but I just don't like being locked in. And I don't like the board. I don't like you all being locked in because you could, you could decide you have enough in written form and you don't need to see it. I'm not saying that's going to happen often, but
That's why I
I-
suggested potentially. We
think
don't
that-
have
yeah.
to.
Right, potentially covers that. I
Do
agree,
we-
it's a little choppy and maybe we could think about improving.
Oh, well.
Yeah, let's move on. And if we think of better language, we can deal with it later.
Yeah, you can do potentially, or otherwise you're gonna have to write out more like at its discretion, blah, 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 or something like
Right.
that. So we'll put a pin in that and then maybe that might be revised further.
Okay, and then the next comment, the rest of the sentence is from Julie.
It's just a time check. It's 8:05, by the way. We have
What was from me?
55 minutes.
Oh, the new B, you mean?
No, the rest of the sentence here, the board you deleted must then decide whether.
Oh,
replace
right.
it.
I broke it down kind of procedurally. I broke it into two things, so. Yeah, if A is if the board agrees. And then B, if we decide to modify. Then yeah. Right, it was just being more explicit in breaking the procedure down. What happens when we make modification?
It looks like you're going with or. Why did you choose or? I'm curious. And you crossed out and.
Actually, that's Kitty's.
Oh, Kitty.
I'm sorry, where are we?
And 5A, I was just curious why you went with or, not and.
It says, if the board agrees with the director on all findings and recommendations, and apparently you put in or decides there is no need for a hearing, the director shall send the findings and recommendations to the chief of police.
Oh, I see, because you would never do both. It would never be, no,
Well,
we
because,
could do both.
You could,
yes,
And is that
So
one of the
then
things
and or is.
Oh, okay.
I think
we didn't
the
want to do and or, yeah.
reason I wrote and is because the one naturally follows from the other. That is, if you're agreeable, then there's no need for a hearing.
well, the reason, now I remember, I thought that or allows more flexibility, like we might think we agree with you. I think there was a case recently where we agreed with you, but we wanted even further information because it seemed
Right.
like such an egregious situation or something. And we wanted to have a hearing, even though we basically agreed with you.
Mhm,
Right.
okay,
And so I
That's
think it
fair.
allows for more flexibility. Now I'm remembering.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay.
Sold. Next.
So then B should say, oh, never mind.
and I
Yeah,
just
I
thought it
think
was appropriate to say whether or not the director agrees with it, because the director may or may not agree. Right?
I think if this is something that I'm not sure about as far as what the charter.
Yeah, you got to make sure this is in sync with the charter, Julie. Did you look at this when you were rewriting it? Because I know Kathy spent a lot of time on this section.
Well, it gives
she was-
everybody a headache.
He was going back and forth between trying to make sure we were synced up.
Yeah, again, I'm trying to make this sync with reality.
To modify the
Oh,
director.
there's reality, and then there's our charter.
I didn't look at it. No.
So anyway,
Certainly makes sense, right? I mean,
I agree that this makes sense. I just am not 100% certain that this is consistent with what the charter contemplates. And of course, we are hampered because the specific section of the charter 18I is very difficult to decipher.
Are we talking about letter B?
We're talking
Yeah.
about B, yes.
and so this may be one of those cases where council and or city attorney is going to have to look at it, but we do what we think makes sense and isn't like totally contrary, but it is going to be the practice.
I
So-
think once the board steps in and modifies, I think it's the board's. I don't think the director is going to opine at that point, at that stage, right?
Well, this is where I thought if the board disagreed, then we're having a hearing.
At that, yeah.
No,
So-
but not always. Haven't we had the situation where we modified something
Yeah, but I
We
agreed.
weren't
with-
having a hearing. We don't want a hearing. We
Yeah,
just,
but I agreed with you. It was a modification that I agreed with.
Yeah,
well, that's why I put stating whether you agree with it. So,
Well,
That's not in the charter. It says, if the board modifies or rejects the FNR of the DPA, it shall issue a written explanation for its decision and forward to the chief. It doesn't say the director is going to indicate their own, you know, where they were on it.
what section, Byron?
yeah, where are
That's-
you?
well,
Hey.
What?
no, but Byron, that's after the hearing. That's
It's
not,
after
in-
the hearing, so it's in, it should be
Never mind.
we're in the FNR stage.
Oh,
18I, it's somewhere in there. It's a long.
Yeah, that,
we are
That
talking about
paragraph is-
after the hearing, Kathy. I am talking about this.
No, we're in the FNR stage.
Went before.
This is before the hearing. This whole section E.
I'm not in E. Let's see. I'm in.
Okay, you need to be in E. This E is
Okay.
entitled Initial Submission and Consideration of Investigative Findings
Oh,
and Recommendations. And actually, may I insert here? Because that's what they
Oh.
are.
I think though that Byron is right. I see it's on page 13 of the charter amendment. If the board modifies or rejects the findings and recommendations of the director of police accountability, it shall issue a written explanation for its decision and forward it to the chief of police.
Yeah,
So I
but
guess,
but that's after a hearing.
that's after a hearing.
oh, okay.
And there's nothing, I'm
So
looking
where
at
are we?
We're in 18I.
So
You're
the-
in the charter, you're in the findings and recommendations stage, and there's nothing in detail about that stage in the charter.
Then I think we can do it this way. or
No, it is
suggest-
in the charter. Hang on. It says in the charter, if the board modifies or
oh,
findings and recommendation of the.
you're doing it too, Cheryl.
Cheryl, that's at the end of
what I
the,
did.
No,
that's-
this is in 18. This is in 18, not 19. This is
Yeah,
I
in-
but-
understand, but you're talking about the end of a hearing.
What?
Are you
What's
in
con-
18? Are you in 18J?
I'm in 18, number 2.
Yeah, J2, right?
J2.
You know, welcome to the confusion of our charter amendment. So
I know, it's terrible.
it started with me, it went to Julie, and now you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because this section is just not clear. Anyway, let's get back to,
Then can't we just leave my suggested language, assuming people think it's okay? And just,
No, I don't think it's okay because I think if you disagree with the director and the director isn't going to modify the findings, then we're having a hearing. I'm not
what if
sending.
we don't, what if they're not saying, a hearing is if we need further fact finding. We don't need further fact finding. We all agree about the facts. We just disagree with the recommendation or the finding.
But Kathy is saying that if we disagree with the director, then we must have a hearing. That's what it sounds like she's saying.
It says, I don't know the site, but it says for further fact finding. What if we don't need further facts?
But she's saying just the fact that we disagree with her. Let's say they bring the facts to us and you know, they have their findings and we disagree with their findings. So that's what B is, right? We disagree with their findings. What Kathy is saying, if that happens where they have one finding and we disagree with it, Kathy is implying that we have to go to a hearing.
But what if
It
it's just a
doesn't-
recommendation? We all agree about the facts. She says this person should be disciplined and we say it wasn't so bad. We disagree with the recommendation of discipline. So it wouldn't make sense to me that you would force us to have a hearing if we're just disagreeing. Like, could be a minor recommendation, but the director is sticking to his or her guns and saying, sorry, I disagree with you. That we shouldn't have to hold a hearing for that, and there's no point holding a hearing.
I understand what you're saying, but Kathy is implying that we have to. So I'm gonna go back to Kathy. Kathy, do we? It doesn't
That is
say
the
it in the
way-
charter.
The charter is not explicit.
Right.
It says,
The char-
within 60 days of completing investigation, the DPA shall submit the investigative findings to the board, and if warranted, it doesn't define what that is. The board may agree to hold a personnel hearing. And what Kathy was trying to do in these interim regs was fill in those gaps, but it's not explicit. So there is room.
And if this seems like reasonable language, let's just move on. And if city council or somebody says, you can't do that, you're forced to have a hearing, it makes no sense to me, but we can't decide it now because it's ambiguous. So let's just go with the logical solution.
Well, so then what happens if the staff says we disagree? So the staff presents some findings, we as the board disagree. What goes forward?
What if it's just about the recommendation? We all agree
What if it's
that
not?
something happened.
What if
We,
it's not? What if it's really the findings? And we feel like,
well, then we do, if we need more fact finding, we will have a hearing.
but I'm not saying we need more fact finding. I'm saying that we read it, and based on what we read, we decide that they made the wrong decision, they being staff. So then what happens? Staff believes it should be X and we believe it should be Y based on the facts they presented, and neither side feels like they need more facts. What happens?
Well, it seems to me, the way the charter is written, if the director brings things to us, and then we either agree with it or disagree with it or modify it or decide we need a hearing.
And
Otherwise, it would just be the director making a decision and we wouldn't be involved, right? What's the point of involving us if we can't modify it or reject it?
Well, I mean,
You
after
can.
the hearing, if we reject it, we have to write the reason why. So why wouldn't we have to write the reason and why we reject theirs and this is what we agree to? I mean,
Sure, we could add something in there about,
that essentially the board would trump staff.
I think the board,
The board does trump staff in certain steps here. So that's not,
and I think somewhere
After a
we
hearing.
have stating there, if they modify it, they need to state the board needs to state its reasons.
That's
But if
after,
that's,
After a hearing.
that's after a hearing.
okay, well, then we should put that here. I mean, I'm fine with that. If the board decides it wants to modify or reject something, it makes sense to explain why.
Well,
Okay, and so then I'm really trying to understand, okay, let's say that happens. We modify, we don't feel like we need another hearing, but we make a modification. Then what goes forward to the chief? Both goes forward to the chief? I'm just trying to understand how
I
this
think
process.
the modification goes forward, but that's where I said, but the director should state whether he or she agrees with the modifications, but I just thought the chief would want to know that, but
I don't like that part of it. I think that out of this side of it, I'm saying this side, the
uh-huh.
director and the board, there should come at some point a consensus of what the findings and recommendations are. And
But what if you can't reach a consensus?
well, that's the whole point of either having a hearing, but the board is going to make the final decision.
But
And
what if you don't need a hearing? You shouldn't be forced to have a hearing if it's really just a matter of opinion about, say, whether there should be
I
discipline or
get that
not.
point. I'm not disagreeing with that point, but this other part where you
Right.
have the
Well, I'm
director.
fine with getting rid of that, stating whether the director agrees, if that seems like it starts to sound adversarial or,
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to avoid. We don't want
Yeah,
our
that's
two
fine.
oversight entities fighting and not being clear on our
yeah,
decisions.
I'm fine with that.
okay, so for the bases that you just referenced, Board Member Leftwich, and between this conversation that's just occurred, we would just remove
Stating whether, the end of B, that last clause, stating whether the director agrees with the modification.
Okay, let's say, take that away. And then we have, if the board decides to modify the director's findings and recommendations, the director shall send the modified findings and a recommendation to the chief of police.
Yeah,
Does that make
and
sense?
I think in
That's
whatever
good.
cover memo we send to city council, we're just gonna have to say, the charter amendment is ambiguous in several areas, so we did our best, you know.
Yeah, we could should we just pop a comment there that in Charter Amendment 18I and what is it, 2? J2,
18I.
18I, that the committee felt that was ambiguous, you know, with regard to this issue, but this is our language.
Which I still have to go on record as disagreeing with.
We're-
Kathy, what
Okay.
part do you disagree with?
If you think that if you disagree with my findings,
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
I think there has to be a hearing.
But if
Uh-huh.
it's not the findings, it's just the recommendation. Because you have findings and recommendations. We all agree about the facts.
Well, you said that. This is your language here. I'm okay. I think I'm okay with the disciplinary recommendations.
Kathy, didn't we have a situation? I hope I'm using the right example, where we were deliberating a matter and there was a back and forth between the director, you and the board, and there was a modification during that came out of that process.
It was a modification that I agreed with. I'm
Yes.
only having an issue where the board wants to modify something and I don't think it's correct.
Why is a hearing going to remedy that? Why should we have a hearing?
Yeah.
I just think that's my reading of the charter.
Yeah. I
'Cause I
sort of
think-
read it that way too.
It's once the board steps in, once they make any change to the director's recommendations, it's theirs. And the director, well, I'm gonna shut it.
It doesn't say in the charter that if we disagree that it has to go to a hearing. It doesn't say that.
It doesn't say that. I'm trying to make sense of this whole scheme.
It doesn't say that. Honestly, I feel comfortable that if we make a modification, that what goes forward is here's our decision and the director can put in, and here's where I disagree. I don't have a problem with directors saying that they disagree with our decision.
So
I
what-
had that in there and I thought the idea was that made it sound adversarial or something.
Well, sometimes we are gonna disagree.
Right, we're not, and I'm comfortable with having disagreements. I'm just taking issue with what the process should be.
So mechanically speaking, let's talk this out so we understand this. And it's 8:23 right now. What is the difference between sending a disagreement between the director and the board to the chief of police versus sending it to a hearing? What are the procedural and practical differences to make sure that I understand and everybody understands that?
I think
Well, the
the-
hearings seems to me like a huge deal. You have to take
it-
What are
people's
the-
time, take the officer's time.
Okay, but is that
It is a
and
huge deal.
that's just for purposes of talking this through? Is it the same trier of a fact, or who is the trier of fact there? With the hearing?
Well, it's the board members, but
The
if we're not
board is the
disagreeing
trier
with
of
the
fact.
facts, but
So
we're
the
not,
board is a
what
trier
if
of
we're not
fact.
disagreeing with the facts? So we don't need, there's not a factual dispute. So why
Okay,
should we?
I don't
a
have an
hearing?
issue with having a difference about the recommendations.
The
Because
findings would be
that's-
something else.
That's really different. So we're really talking about the findings.
Yeah. So the findings is not necessarily a factual dispute, but a difference of interpretation of where the preponderance lies, perhaps, with the review of the totality of the circumstances of all the facts that were already gathered. Everyone should have the same set of facts.
Mhm.
at that point in time. And then going to a hearing would result in what? You do have the board as a trier of fact, and what would be
Right.
the director's
then-
role in
And
that
you
hearing?
get live testimony and the opportunity to probe further than
You might,
what was raised in the interviews.
sure.
You often identify lines of questioning that were not pursued by staff in its investigation.
So that's,
There may be credibility issues that are better evaluated by live
live,
testimony
yeah.
than reading a
think-
transcript.
I think there's a qualitative difference between a hearing with live testimony and those type of procedures than, the paper fact gathering process that comes before. So I'm agreeing in that sense with Director Lee that I think this is kind of different and you're pivoting it into a different set. It's not exactly, we're just gathering the same facts all over again. That have already been gathered. I think it's different. So we do need to think of that. I'm not sure how we'd come out with that, but make sure that there's an understanding that that's pretty different to do a live hearing. Particularly when you're talking about a difference of conclusion or determination on the findings, applying the preponderance with the same set of facts already provided. And then compare that outcome to just sending it to the chief of police. Please explain to me what happens if we just send to the chief of police a cover letter saying we have a disagreement on the findings. What would the chief of police then do with that?
That was kind of my question. So what happens? But here's, I'm gonna throw this out. What if we have a disagreement, clearly the director is seeing something in what they found different than what the board is seeing. So maybe it's a discussion of our conflict and we do a hearing to sort through that difference. Maybe that hearing will give us more information to sort through that difference. Maybe in that instance, we should go to a hearing if we have a difference of opinion. I'm just throwing that out there.
Mhm. I agree with that.
I mean, that could be what we're potentially suggesting to the city council. That's really what we think that's how 18I should be interpreted.
Has this come up yet, Kathy and Byron, in any of our findings and your findings and recommendations and our decisions?
Has what come up?
That we disagree with you and don't have a hearing?
No.
Okay, so it's probably gonna be unusual, but it could certainly happen. We want to make sure.
I
that
also
we're-
want to put
Well,
in
there
the
was
minutes.
discussion, wasn't there discussion, Kathy, where there was not complete agreement, but the both parties wound up on the same side after some discussion?
Yes,
Yes, but
Yeah.
that was an eventual agreement.
That was
Eventual
okay.
agreement,
Kitty's
yes.
question was whether there was ever disagreement that didn't go to a hearing, and my answer is no.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I have to put into the mix, potentially relevant, maybe not. The officers would rather have a hearing. And
But it- yeah.
I suspect that it will not be received happily to have a difference of opinion arrive at the chief's desk.
Really? I guess I hadn't thought that they would necessarily always want a hearing.
I
Oh,
don't,
yeah.
it depends on it depends on the decisions.
Well, but but the assumption is you guys come up with a finding and we come up with something different, which, maybe, whatever the difference is. I think it's fair to go to a hearing because clearly there's something in the facts that we're missing
Yeah,
or we need to clarify. So I personally don't have an issue with if there is a disagreement, we go to hearing and, we suss through
Makes-
that part a little bit more.
That makes sense to me. You want the hearing suggests some form of process, which suggests transparency.
But what if the director says, sustained on this, and we say, we don't think, we've read the interview, seen the body worn camera footage. we don't think this is sustained. You think the officer necessarily wants a hearing then when actually, I mean, we can't assume that every time we disagree that we're going to want to find in favor against the officer. What
No,
if it's
that's
the
true.
opposite
Yeah.
scenario?
Yeah. I do think it's probably more consistent with the charter's confused implications.
What's
Yeah,
there
maybe.
now on what Julie has there in B, or what Kathy had
No,
originally?
going to a hearing if we
If
disagree.
disagreement.
But it doesn't say that. And it says if we need more fact finding, it's like, does the board, have we decided we need more fact finding? Well, maybe we will. We have decided that.
Well, I'm implying that if we have a disagreement, that we need more fact finding. That's what I'm implying.
I
Fair
don't know if
enough.
that's always the case.
That may not be true, but I mean, if we have a disagreement, clearly we're not seeing something that the director is seeing, and vice versa.
Mhm.
So maybe there's a reason to get more information so we can clarify whatever that point is.
Yes, seems
So-
inefficient to me to say that we have to always have hearings, but
I understand where you're coming from. So I'm trying to also look at it pragmatically in terms of the procedure. If it were to go to the chief of police, would that be any more efficient than with a, a cover letter basically saying that there's no agreement and here's the two different viewpoints? Would that be any more efficient than going in the long run than going to a hearing?
Well, it's more efficient
Yeah.
in terms of time and number of people hours devoted to the whole hearing. But on the other hand, I think if there's disagreement, I believe that the officers would appreciate the opportunity to make their case in person.
well, only if we're disagreeing with the finding that the director makes sustaining something, they probably would be happy with our decision that disagrees with that. And that say,
agree.
fine, what if we say it's unfounded?
I agree with
Both
Julie on that.
both decisions would go forward. The director's decision would go forward too.
But then why would, I
Right.
mean, to me at that point, something is missing. If we're not seeing the same thing, something is missing, and we need to go and find more information. We need
That's
to
a
do
good
more
point.
fact finding.
Let's
Right.
just go back to the original language for B. And that's what it sounds like we're moving towards.
Okay, I'll just say that it says if we need more fact finding. So
No.
if we decide that we do indeed need more fact finding, we should hold a hearing. But if we don't, if there's isn't consensus that we need more facts, I don't think we should be forced to have a hearing. But maybe we should just put a pin in this, and this is something that the full board can discuss.
How about we use the charter's tactic and somewhere in this B include the wording, if warranted, hold a hearing.
And then if
Because
warranted,
that's what I says, letter I in the charter says, if warranted.
okay, and warranted, presumably the board would go through a conversation with the director about, is it the issue of the facts, or is really we have the same set of facts and we have a different application of the preponderance standard to the facts, which I think board member Leftwich is trying to get at, that there could be a situation where we really have all the factual sufficiency. We've hit the factual sufficiency to find a preponderance or not so. But there's just a disagreement about the weighting of those facts when you apply the preponderance. Is that what you're saying, board member Leftwich?
Well, I'm just looking at this again. So C is if we agree with the findings and that there's no need for a hearing. C is we decide that further fact finding is needed, so we want to hold a complaint hearing. And B is we decide to modify it, but we don't think a hearing is necessary. So if we need it, if we want a hearing, that's under C, right?
If you want a hearing, that's under C, yeah.
Okay.
So I
yeah,
don't think. It's
think
just
I
three
like-
scenarios. It's the three scenarios, right?
Yeah,
We agree, no hearing. We modify it. We decide further fact finding is needed and we want a hearing.
and I think I like board member Calavita's adjective there that comes right out of 18I that gives some, obviously some discretion for interpretation of whether or not it's necessary or not. What was the language again from 18I? What was that word?
If warranted,
Oh, if warranted.
Were you,
the board may,
Where would that go?
were
in
you
the charter.
suggested here? To replace this
B.
language?
I thought she meant B.
And B,
Oh, and B?
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm very confused. I'm
Where would
confused.
you put if warranted?
C,
Oh, C.
Oh, see.
You're
the
right.
board
instead of if the
decides-
board decides that further fact finding is needed. Just say if warranted, the board may vote to hold a confidential complaint, or the board may hold a confidential complaint hearing.
so how does that?
Is
how
that
does
needed? Does that change?
Yeah,
What's there?
I'm
yeah,
just gonna, for purposes of discussion, I'm gonna type
I
this.
just like to echo the charter language.
so how
I
does,
thought the charter says fact finding. I thought,
no, it says if warranted.
In C, it says warranted. If warranted, the board may agree to hold a personnel hearing.
Yeah, it does say that.
Okay, and the warranted
I
would
don't
capture,
I
Vicky,
don't
I've got-
understand. I don't
Okay.
understand why C comes before B in this sequence. It seems to me that in B, you're talking about sending things forward to the chief.
yeah,
And in C, you're talking about that we might have a hearing.
right.
Seems like they're in the wrong order.
So you're saying move C to B?
Yeah,
flip it around. Okay. With that,
Well, A
Director Lee.
is if you agree completely, then you're going to the chief.
Right.
Then you want to talk about going to a hearing, and then you want to talk about going to the chief?
I see, yeah. So the going to the chief seems less of an escalation than going to a hearing, but I'm not sure. As part of what I'm trying to understand.
It seems like to me, A, B, and C is just clarifications of what might happen with a decision. One is we agree and it goes to the chief.
Right,
One is we decide we need more information and we go to a hearing.
Right.
One is we want to modify what the director does and we're going to send that modification forward to the chief. That's what B is saying. So to me, it's more outlining what the potential resolution could be,
Right.
our decision. That, to me, that's all that is. To me, it's not talking about a sequential action. It's saying, here's 3 options of what may happen at the board level.
okay,
Once those finding and recommendations are brought forward.
I see that too. We don't want to give too much value to one versus the other, because these are 3 outcomes that could happen.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily a progression towards anything in particular. It's just 3 different ways to resolve 3 different types of potential outcomes. And hopefully, more likely than not, it will be a consensus with an agreement under A. But sometimes that doesn't happen.
Well, A contemplates an agreement.
Right,
I mean, I think, and you guys let me know, I think we're all okay with A and C. I think where we're running into this issue is if the board decides to make a modification to the director's decision without needing an additional hearing. And the question is, what happens to that modification that we make? Does that modification go forward to the chief? Or does the modification go forward with some note from the director saying, I disagree? That, to me, that's what you guys correct me if I'm wrong.
Like
That,
a
yes, that
minority
is
report
the
type of thing.
disagreement we're having.
Okay, so I still kind of fall back on if the director believes one thing based on what the findings, what they find in their investigation, and we believe something else, to me, something's missing. And if something's missing, more than likely than not, we probably need a hearing to get that additional facts. That's just my perspective, but I'm open to what everybody else thinks. But I also hear what
board member
I
Lapwood.
also hear and understand what Julie is saying.
Yeah.
I do understand that. But it just seems like just for example, so far with there have been times where we have disagreed and we were able to kind of discuss it and come to an agreement. So you know, and it could happen, but I just can't see us coming up with something where we just.
We also have to imagine different people in all of these roles, right? We all get along, we're consensus based, so we try hard to reach an agreement. We're not that adversarial of a group, but we all won't be here forever. And you could get people who are very adversarial and a director and a board that don't get along. I'm just, you know, again, when you draft these things, you have to think of different scenarios. So just because it hasn't happened doesn't mean that in a, you know, 5 years from now, people will be different players, that you'd have to imagine disagreements and how you're going to, you know, deal with them.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, I'm just trying to think, is just thinking about the spectrum of between with B, going to the chief versus going to a hearing, because as board member Owens has noted that most of the time it's probably going to be a factual thing, but board member Leftwich is noting that we want to be prepared for the circumstance where it could be disagreement of how to apply the standards, and there's no kind of culture of trying to reach a consensus. So you want to give a mechanism to resolve the disagreement or the conflict.
So for modification, they're going to go to the chief if the director's in agreement.
Yeah.
If the director's not in agreement, we're going to go to C. Will that work?
That's the question that we're having.
No, that's what I'm.
You
No,
kind of
I don't
suggesting,
think so. I don't think you
Don't think so?
automatically go to C just
No.
because the director disagrees.
See, that's the question we're
I was
discussing.
trying, I know, but I was just
question.
trying to, I was thinking that this B here.
As a
you need
progression.
You need flexibility. It
okay, so
seems-
you're, Investigator Norris, you're suggesting that as a potential progression from B, if there is that type of analysis disagreement versus something that could be resolved factually and through further hearing.
Yeah, if the board, because that's going to be this discussion, if the director and the board are in agreement with the board's modifications, it goes to the chief, right?
Right.
If there's no agreement, then the only other option is a hearing.
No.
That's what B is saying.
That's
Both,
what B is saying.
both
B
the
is saying-
board's decision and the director's decision would go to the chief.
Oh, that's right. She's trying to avoid, well.
Are you
trying to
saying,
figure out what
Investigator
to do
Norris,
with
that
B.
you, are you saying, Investigator Norris, you think that it should then go to a hearing?
Well, that's where I was, yeah, that's where I was moving towards. If there's a fundamental disagreement between this F and R.
The scenario where the director and the board cannot come to an agreement on the determination of the existing facts, and they have a different interpretation of where the preponderance is, just use that hypothetical,
Yes.
and they can't come to an agreement.
And my big thing is and maybe it's just my thing. I don't like, and I think Julie, you recognize this. I don't like that the charter member sets up this potential conflict between the two entities, the oversight entities. And I think decisions that come out of this side of it, and I say this side versus the chief of police side and city manager side, I think we need to be on the same page so our findings are strong, our decisions are strong, but that's my thing.
Yeah, well, that would be nice, but I'm just saying that it isn't always gonna happen. And so you have to envision a situation where that doesn't happen and you can't reach consensus.
But in that case, Julie, if we have a hearing, what goes forward is the board's decision.
It's the board's decision.
See, what goes forward after a hearing is one decision.
One decision.
So
We-
what's the point of having that hearing if we could have skipped that step? Why do that? It just seems so unnecessary
To
to me.
avoid a split decision.
Well, the charter amendment is set up so that we're the ones that decide if we need to hear. I don't know.
Kathy, so the findings and recommendations go to the chief in any case, even if we have a hearing, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah.
right.
So they will see anyway that there's a disagreement between the findings and recommendations and the outcome of a hearing.
But I think what Julie is saying is why waste time doing the hearing if we feel like we have all the information that we need? The staff brings finding recommendations to board, and they present it, and we feel like we have all the information that we need in those findings and recommendations. We just disagree with the staff's decision. And what Julie is saying is she feels like it's a waste of time to have a
understand.
hearing
Yeah,
in that situation. And I totally understand what she's saying. And honestly, I don't really know what the answer is. But I hear what she's saying. Why, if we know, if we have what we need, we just
Yeah.
disagree. What, and B, what we're trying to figure out is what happens at that point. We have everything we need. The director has everything they need. We're not saying we need more information. We're just saying we disagree.
I think the honest answer is what we have under B here. You know,
Chief
we've
of Police
examined-
determines. Ms. Saginaw has her hand raised too. So it would be B here. And does that ultimately mean, I just want to make sure everybody understands, that ultimately mean that the chief of police makes a decision? Or how does it come out if B occurs?
The chief always makes.
Always make the
The
decision.
chief
Right.
is, except when it goes to the city manager, chief will make the final decision.
So it's going to happen anyways, right?
Anyway,
So
yeah,
let me throw this out there.
Oh, Kit,
Throw this
sorry,
out
but
there real
Kit,
quick. If we
Fine.
have a hearing, let's say we disagree, we have a hearing, we end up, we still disagree. What goes forward to the chief is what we think.
Is the
So
board.
at that point, then why
Yeah.
wouldn't it be if we have a disagreement and we feel like we have all the information we need? Why doesn't what we think go to the chief? 'Cause it's the same thing.
it does.
No, but in B, we're saying, in B, Kathy is saying she
Yeah.
doesn't like the idea if we disagree and we don't have a hearing, that what we agree to doesn't go to the chief. She wants to have some sort of, but the
Input.
director disagrees. And I'm
Right.
saying, if ultimately, because ultimately, if we disagree, and let's say we're forced to go to a hearing and we still disagree, what's
Yeah.
gonna go forward is what the board decides.
Yeah,
So why can't we just, if we don't feel a need for a hearing and we have all the information we need, why can't what the board decide go forward? Because that's what's gonna happen if we waste time with a hearing.
I don't know, you can be sure that you have all the information you need, and that would be the purpose of the hearing.
Gives you that option under C. So it's not a requirement, but it's a potential option if you want to go to hearing.
I'm playing the devil's advocate with.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. Oh,
Yeah, I'm playing the
I thought
devil's
Ms.
advocate.
Ms. Saginaw had her hand up previously. I was making
Okay.
sure that we catch that. Thanks.
To address the question that board member Owens is asking of why have a hearing, right? It's yes, in some ways it's like you already need the facts. Why would you need to hear the facts again? I absolutely agree that seems like kind of a waste of time. However, it's also been said that ideally that you don't have a disagreement, that you do work out what the disagreements are and come to get on the same page. And it seems to me that the hearing would serve the purpose of allowing everybody to take a fresh look at the facts, and it would be a second chance for the director and the board to get on the same page. So even though it may seem redundant, I can see that there could be a purpose served by having the hearing in that case.
But the director and the board don't have to get on the same page for a
Right.
hearing. So
I
if
agree.
they
They
don't,
don't have to, but it's been pointed out, it's definitely better, right? That Inspector Norris was saying it's really, much better if there isn't a split recommendation, if there isn't the case that
Well, it is better, but we can't, it's not always gonna
it's not
happen.
always going to happen, but I'm just saying that in the cases where there is disagreement before a hearing, the hearing provides a second opportunity for people to reconsider and see that maybe there is some space to get on the same page. And then if there isn't, there isn't. But I'm
I'm
saying.
just thinking it's a
But
big
from
deal.
what
I
I've heard
think
this evening, from what I've heard this evening, it's like, what would be the point of having a hearing? And I'm suggesting that a point of having the hearing could be to allow a second chance for agreement.
Okay, thanks. Board Member Calavito, you have your hand up. And time check is 8:50. We'd like to end at 9.
So I guess if we have a hearing, we're acting as if we have a hearing, then only the board decision goes forward and therefore, there's one decision. But what also has gone forward is the director's findings and recommendations. So it'll be clear that there's a difference between the findings and recommendations of the director and the board's finding after a hearing. So the disagreement kind of remains. That's all.
So then so I'm gonna throw this out there with B. Why don't we do the same thing? The board comes up with whatever their decision is. The director's findings and recommendations say something different. We feel like we don't need a hearing, so both go forward. I think that's actually happened too, with the hearing that we've had.
What has happened?
That you guys had one finding and we changed it during the hearing.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what was already happened.
During a hearing, not during F&R.
Yes, but
During
but we've had a situation where what went forward after the hearing disagreed with your findings and recommendations. So it's kind of the same thing. If we feel like we don't need a hearing and we just go forward, that disagreement it's the same thing.
So Cheryl, are you now saying that you would think that we don't necessarily need a hearing if there's a disagreement?
I don't think, I honestly think what will happen is we will go to a hearing, but I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it's an absolute that we have to. But I honestly think that in probably 99.9% of the cases that this happens, I think we will go to a hearing. Because I think we will want more facts or more understanding of something. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm leaving us the option that if we feel like, hey, we don't really need any more facts, this is our decision, it gives us that out. It doesn't force a hearing.
So in other words, you'd be okay with A, B, and C as they're
drafted, their options, right? Their potential outcomes as you described, Board Member Owens. It's not a progression. It's not elements that must be satisfied to get anywhere. There are 3 possible outcomes.
Yeah, and like I said, I don't think B, honestly, I can't see B ever really happening, but it gives you the option.
Sure, it's a precautioning, it's a safety valve of what to do in case that does happen.
Yeah, because why force a hearing if we really feel like we don't need it?
Sure. So are we in agreement that this language is okay then?
yes.
No.
Oh yeah.
Maybe the board is, but
Okay, the board, Director Lee, you're still. So can you remind us again?
Look, we got a disagreement now.
Yeah. And point again, and again, like one more time, so we all understand the concern around B.
I would like, this is a smaller issue, that second section in B that starts all findings, I think that needs to be its own paragraph at the end of all of this. After all the
Findings and
options.
recommendations. Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to hear from Kathy.
Yeah, Director Lee, would you entirely take out B and just leave A and C?
I would take out, I'm okay with having a difference in the recommendation on discipline and letting the chief know of that difference, because
But not on the findings?
yeah, but
And if
not on the findings. I just, after slogging through the charter and trying to develop these regulations, I feel very strongly that if there's a difference that the charter intended that these things be heard.
Where does it say that in the charter?
It doesn't say that in the charter.
So we can't resolve this.
reading
Why
it.
don't we just take this, we'll take this to the board and then it'll go to the city council, right? So
But I do want to hear from Kathy where you think the implication resides, because I think you might be right, but I can't put my finger on where it's implied.
I frankly, I can't put my finger on it either. I just think that,
It's in 18. It's in section 18 of the charter.
Oh,
amendment.
well,
it's in 18I.
It's in 18. I mean,
I mean, it says the board may, I understand, so you're saying that your overall interpretation of this policy, which is not necessarily drafted that well, strongly suggests to you or implies to you that it would make sense to go to a hearing rather than have this split type of findings directed to the chief of police. So that would mean that if you were to modify this to your liking, you would in B, take out findings and leave recommendations. And then essentially that would require disagreements with the director to go to a hearing.
Right.
And so we
then-
can drop a comment there, if this is what people are thinking, that the director's interpretation of 18, maybe it's 18I, is that any disagreement over the findings and the recommendations, the findings should go to a hearing, whereas the recommendations can go to the chief of police. But we will have to hear from the whole board and then maybe the council about what they think about that.
Chair, just to pop in real quickly, we have more representatives of the Berkeley Police Association
Yes.
online. If you'd like to invite them to,
A good idea.
they'd like
Yes,
to.
we'd like to
comment.
hear from them as well. Would the representatives from the Berkeley Police Association, would you like to speak? Please raise your hand. Provide any suggestions on this particular issue.
Or if you'd like to be promoted to panelist,
Yeah, promoted to panelists.
please let us know.
So,
where are we?
okay, so we're not seeing any. So that is B, and I think that comment, does that look good, guys, to kind of flag where we're unsure? Will we have a disagreement about this?
Sure.
Okay, so it is 8:57. How about we say this, we'll go on for like 10 more minutes, and then let's close this off. Maybe one more issue. What do you guys think?
some of us are also waiting for the council item to come up too.
Right.
Looks like they're still on the ZAB appeal.
I know, I see it. You're
Okay.
multitasking.
I've got another issue that's after this, but it's kind of meaty, so I don't know if we really should.
We should probably wait for that then.
No meaty issues.
Yeah, no meeting.
No.
Please.
Why
Is
don't we just
something-
call it a night?
Yeah,
We call
yeah,
it-
why don't
okay.
we call it, because we're right at the end of a section.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's a clean place to start.
we'll start at
Yes,
F
it
then.
gives
That's
us an
good.
opportunity to think through this and comb through the
Right.
charter some more to see if we see something else in
Okay.
here. Or even if we look at what it says after the hearing, what happens, but it gives us a chance to kind of
Yeah.
digest the charter a little bit more when it comes to this issue.
Sounds
So
good.
we
So
can
we'll start
start
at
on,
F.
I will withdraw the thing about absent tolling, which is under F1, so we don't have to deal with that.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll
Okay.
start even below F1.
Yeah,
My thing was above, my thing was
Okay.
E5.
So maybe next time we meet,
Wait a
we'll,
minute.
we could start at E5, but then
Oh.
back down to,
Oh, okay. I just realized the thing that I had was adding to C. So yeah, sorry. But it's a different, it's meaty, so.
okay. So we can take a look at C again when we meet again. But then jump back down to F7. So that would be page 10 of 22. So if we start at C9 of 22 and then jump down to 10 of 22 at F7. But would it make sense, Director Lee, if board member Leftwich sent an email about telling us before the next meeting what the immediate issue with C is? So we can kind of have a preview of it.
Or I can
Sure.
tell you what it is real quickly. All it was is that whether or not, if we decide to hold a hearing and we think we need further evidence,
Oh, that is,
about directing staff to, say a key witness was missed.
Okay. Okay.
We
good, so we'll
touched
start
Our
with there.
ability to do
Yeah.
additional investigation, that's the concept.
Okay, so we'd be kind of sending it back, remanding it back to the staff for them to pull additional information through an investigation.
Good.
Okay, so we'll chat about that then when we get next time.
Maybe that also applies to our ABC options where we have a disagreement. Maybe it's, directing
Yeah.
staff to go back and bring something back to show us
Right,
and we
without
touched
having
on
to
this.
do a hearing.
Yeah, we touched
Right.
on this. We're not sure we can do this, but
Oh,
Right.
well,
Okay,
that's
that's-
why I said it was meaty, but I think it's another one of those things that makes sense, so we'll deal
Okay,
with
let's-
it next time.
Let's bear that in mind and see if whether or not it's in fact something that's permissible to do after you go through a hearing. Okay. Great. Do we need a motion to adjourn then, or?
Does
Chair,
Ken have her
Chair.
hand
You
up?
adjourn? I
Chair,
just
I'm
wanted-
sorry.
we have
I
three more
can't adjourn yet.
items. The next item is to schedule or confirm next
Yes.
meeting date.
Oh,
Thank you
she
for
has her
reminding.
hand up.
May I just bring up to your attention, and not to discuss it tonight, but just as
Okay.
your representative public member, to say that the discussion about anonymous and confidential, I found very confusing, because to me, anonymous means somebody who has made a contact to say, here's this issue, but I'm not going to tell anybody who I am.
Right.
Whereas confidential is someone who said, here's this issue and I'm willing to continue to talk about it with you. I'm not just giving you something and running away, leaving something on your doorstep, ringing the bell and running away. I'll talk about it with you, but I don't want you to tell anybody else
Right.
who you're talking to. And in the discussions that I've heard in the subcommittee, that distinction has not been at all clear to me. And so it's been very confusing for me. So I
I
just
agree.
ask,
Let's make sure that
Okay.
we'll go over the definitions
you.
of that and where they apply
Yes.
when we
thank
meet.
you.
Great, thank you for that reminder. So are we
No,
meeting?
you're
March-
right, Kit. We've been mixing apples and oranges. So-
Yeah, we should be
Sorry,
specific about that.
I mentioned that, yeah. Okay, so we're up to scheduling next meeting, Chair.
Yes. It says March
Oh,
10th.
March 10th. It's already scheduled.
You said schedule or confirm. Is everyone in agreement with that date? And time?
Whatever we said before,
Yes, you said March 10th before.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
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 great. That is
good.
confirmed then.
the next item is public comment, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone who would like to make public comment? Do we have any raised hands here?
No raised hands.
Okay. So thank you, Investigator Norris, for reminding me of the agenda items, and we don't have any public comment. Would someone like to move for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Great, so unless there's any objections, not seeing or hearing any, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
Good night.
everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye.
On to the next meeting, Kitty.
Yes.